what you're really saying is we have a class system based on IQ. Now, Charles Murray wrote a book on this 25 years ago that included a very controversial race chapter, which he never should have included because it obscured the core point of the book, which is what I just said.
Right, and then you wrote Coming Apart, which is basically the book without the race chapter.
Exactly.
Right?
Okay, so you always read it, and it's like actually the most brilliant thing I've read in the past 20 years. Those two books together explain what has happened. We have a ruling class that is becoming impenetrable.
If you looked at Black America in the 1950s and compared them to Black America today, you'd be left wondering what the fuck happened. In the 1950s, Black Americans were employed at rates higher than white people. They owned their own businesses. They appeared well-dressed in public. They did not struggle with all of the enormous social problems that they do today. In modern America, the Black family has disintegrated. Crime rates are out of control. Drug addiction and gang violence are constant problems. How did all of this happen? How were Black people given more access to all of the things that white people had available to them and somehow ended up worse off? Now, I used to believe, like many people do believe on the right, that Black people themselves were at fault for this. After all, many penniless immigrants have come to the United States after the 1960s and managed to do well for themselves as a group. However, my views of this have evolved somewhat, and I now agree somewhat with the left, but for very different reasons, that Black people are indeed victims. You see, in the 1960s, Americans acknowledged the fact that Black people were not treated fairly or equally as white people. And the solution that we ended up applying is to give them full access to all of the things that white Americans had. That means full access to the free market and to individual rights. Now, many people, particularly on the left, consider this to be the greatest thing ever. Anyone who's received a public school education in the United States was taught that the granting of civil rights to Blacks in the 1960s was an unconditional moment of greatness. In fact, the public education system in the United States celebrates the granting of civil rights to Black people as perhaps the greatest part of American history. While people who advocated for civil rights for Black people, such as Martin Luther King, I believe had definitely the best intentions, I disagree that the granting of civil rights to Black people in the 1960s is one of the greatest parts of America's history. In fact, I would go as far as to say that it's one of the saddest parts of our country's history. Now, before you write me off as some sort of horrible racist, why don't you hear what I have to say? Just because you have individual rights and access to the free market doesn't automatically mean that everything's handed to you on a silver platter. Being part of the American free market means that you have to compete with other people. At the time that civil rights were granted to Black people, they were at a very big disadvantage with their white counterparts. Their schools were not as good. Their businesses had not been subjected to as much competition as the white businesses had been. Many Black people lived amongst other Black people who did not always speak English correctly. Having been brought to the United States as slaves, they did not have the level of inheritance or capital that white people had. These are all huge disadvantages that made Black people a lot less competitive compared to white people in a marketplace. Yet that's exactly what we did. We forcibly thrusted them into a competition where they would now have to not only compete with each other, but compete with other white people. So what ended up happening? Well, for those Black people that were highly talented, that were very skilled business people, this ended up being fantastic for them. Many of those people would end up leaving their Black communities behind. They would move to one of the many wealthy enclaves that started to form in the United States around the same period of time. For Blacks who were not so talented, whose businesses were maybe not quite as competitive, a lot of them experienced pretty humiliating defeats. Many of the Black-owned businesses that existed in the 1950s ended up being destroyed by competition. It's during the same period of time that you saw chain stores like Walmart hollow out small businesses across the United States. The fact that Black people were so crushed in this competition by whites who had so much more resources available to them was absolutely humiliating and devastating for the black community. It's following this competition that you see so much antisocial behavior developing in black communities. You have the rise of gangs and criminality. Black people begin to have contempt for those who do end up leaving their communities behind. In some situations, black children are discouraged from engaging in competition altogether. Black people stop getting married and poverty becomes widespread amongst black America. Now, when most people think about civil rights, they only think about the good things that come with that. They forget the fact that being part of a free market means that you have to compete with other people. People who may have advantages over you, such as having a more stable family, having an inheritance, having access to better schools, or more opportunities to learn things. This whole free market system is not going to be fantastic for people who are in a competitive disadvantage with other people. People on the left have acknowledged the fact that black people did not successfully compete with white people at the same level. But their conclusion is that this was due to racism rather than the fact that white people had more advantages to them that allowed them to be more competitive in the marketplace. In order to combat supposed racism, the left advocates for affirmative action. The problem is that affirmative action is terrible for black people. To explain why, let's think about law school. In order to get into law school, students have to take a test, which is basically a proxy IQ test called the LSAT. Blacks need a lower LSAT score to go to the same school that a white person would be accepted to. So what ends up happening to the black law students? They end up going to schools where they are the least intelligent students in the school. This means that they fail out at a much higher rate than the white students. It means that they're much less likely to pass the bar exam and actually become licensed attorneys. It also means that they'll be less competitive amongst their white competitors upon graduating from the school. In fact, for their entire career, they may be regulated to the bottom tier of their profession as a result of this affirmative action that they receive. This is great for white people as a group because it basically guarantees that there will always be a floor of black students at the bottom that white students will easily be able to outcompete. Affirmative action is a lazy and stupid solution to a complex problem. People in favor of affirmative action, I believe, have identified an authentic problem. People who advocate for affirmative action probably have good intentions. They're identifying a real problem and they're trying to solve it. The problem is that their solution is not going to work. The Democrats have recently proposed a new solution to this problem, which is to provide reparations for black people. This will also fail. Giving people a lump sum payment does not make them more competitive in a marketplace. Most people who win the lottery, for example, end up blowing through the money after only a few years. Consider the story of Shanisha Taylor. Shanisha Taylor was prosecuted for child abuse after she left her children in a hot car in order to apply for a job interview. As a black woman, many people felt sorry for her, and her story became a viral news story. She was given over $100,000 in donations. In order to resolve her child abuse case, a deal was offered to her where the charges would be dropped if she used the $100,000 in donations she received in order to pay for her children's education. However, after only a few months, Shanisha Taylor had spent all of the money and she was now penniless. She ended up having the charges against her reinstated and was sentenced to probation. People who believe that the solution to this problem is to just cut black people a check for a small amount of money, those people are kidding themselves. This problem cannot be solved with reparations. A lot of the problems that black people face as a group today are problems that America is starting to face entirely as a society. Now, like I said in the beginning of this video, I used to think of black people as being responsible for their own misfortunes. The two individuals that really changed my mind on this are ironically two right-wing people who are often considered to be amongst society's most racist individuals. Those two people are Charles Murray and Tucker Carlson. Charles Murray's book really changed my point of view on this. I know you're probably thinking that I'm talking about this book, but no, I'm actually talking about this book. In Coming Apart, Charles Murray talks about how the liberal capitalist society in America basically separates people from each other. High school students in every city in the United States compete with each other for grades and then take standardized tests such as SATs, which are proxies for IQ tests. The best and smartest students are then separated from the communities they come from and are sent to elite schools such as Harvard or UC Berkeley. These elite students then go on to elite jobs in wealthy enclaves in New York City, Silicon Valley, or other places that are very expensive to live in and that are basically off limits to middle income people. The communities that get left behind end up almost like wasteland societies. They no longer have any bright, hardworking, or talented people, and they descend into shitholes. People left behind in these cities end up addicted to drugs, crime rates rise, women no longer want to get married to the men, and therefore out-of-wedlock births become commonplace. Upon granting civil rights to black people, this happened right away in those communities. But now these same problems are starting to happen in white communities across the United States. The liberal capitalist society is constantly stealing people from other communities. We even do it with immigration. Third world countries that badly need hardworking, talented people are having their best citizens sucked away by the United States capitalist system. Wealthy globalist corporations in the United States are basically stealing people. Whatever you believe causes these people to be so successful, whether it's virtuous character, a strong work ethic, or just genetics, are being stolen and being put to work to line the pockets of wealthy capitalists in the United States. As long as we keep treating people like cogs in the machine, as long as we keep forcing people to constantly compete with each other all of the time, we are always going to have problems with inequality in this country. You may be okay with that, but I'm not. I believe that what happened to black people in the United States was an injustice. They shouldn't have been enslaved, and then they shouldn't have been forced into competition with much better equipped white people following the civil rights era. When an injustice occurs, there should be an ability to right the wrong, to fix the problem. And it's for that reason that I believe that black people deserve a chance at redemption. They deserve the opportunity to be able to live and function in society and compete with white people on an equal playing field. However, reparations or affirmative action are only going to make the problem worse. They're not going to make black people more competitive. The only way I think that black people will ever have a chance at redemption is for us to stop being so competitive all of the time. We have so much modern technology available to us. There's no reason why every person needs to be working full time at this point in our society. We need people to have time in their lives to address the social problems that they face. If poor black and white people in the United States are not constantly forced into degrading, soul-crushing, energy-killing, full-time employment, if we weren't so obsessed with money and material objects, then people could achieve dignity in other ways. You will not hear any politician propose this, but it's the honest truth. In order to solve these types of problems, we need to dramatically ratchet down the competition, and we need to focus on rebuilding our lives and communities. The focus needs to be on things that really matter, not material objects, not money, but human dignity. Well, if you like this video and you're not subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks.